Hey College Success, this is your lecture video for Chapter 10. So we're going to jump in, and for Chapter 10 I'm going to rely mostly on the slides so that we can walk through and talk about the concepts from the chapter. But as always, please make sure that you check out the actual textbook and visit sections that you feel like are going to be most beneficial for you. This chapter is about understanding financial literacy, and so I think this is a topic where we all have to think about it, and so it's applicable no matter what stage in life you are, whether you're a high school student or you've been in the job market for a while, you're a returning college student, whatever the case is. Thinking about our finances is one of those things that it just doesn't go away unless you're extremely lucky and very wealthy. So when I go through the slides, I encourage you to come back into the textbook and maybe hit on something that you'd like to know more about. Let's say that you just need to know more about saving in general or credit cards, pay more attention to those sections. All right, so as always, this is going to start out with just like an overview of what the chapter covers, and then here are some check-in questions. Do you actively monitor your finances? Do you know the benefits of and risks of credit? Do you know how you're going to repay your student loans if you have loans to pay for your schooling? And then do you protect your identity and your assets, especially online? And so again, these are the things that the chapter will cover. It's going to focus on saving, emergency plans, making sure that you know the risks and rewards of credit cards, different options for paying for college. So this first section goes over financial planning and how to make sure that we're doing it appropriately. There's a 5-step financial planning process, and to get more, and here's like a little visual of it, but to get a better detail of that, this is where you would go into the textbook, section 10.1, and you'll have all the steps kind of laid out a little bit more thoroughly here. They really go into detail with each of these. And on your quiz for chapter 10, it will specifically ask you to walk through these 5 steps with the scenarios. So I do encourage you to pay attention to this section. So financial goals, develop a goal. So for instance, I don't know, summer's coming up. Maybe you want to go on vacation. So your goal might be to pay for summer vacation. What are the alternatives or options for achieving those? Where are you sitting with your savings, your checking? What ways can you maybe raise money if you're working? Are there additional ways to get income? What plan can you put into play? What steps can you take? Implement the plan and then adjust it and reflect on it. And then again, this will go into more detail on each of those steps. And they have an example of buying a car to kind of walk you through each one. And the importance of really making sure that you are monitoring and adjusting the plan as needed. So having having a financial plan in process is so important. Even if it's not a huge purchase, even if you're just looking for something for a few $100s or, compared to like a car or, a large vacation or something, it's important to have that kind of stuff in mind so you are spending and saving appropriately. Okay, so the next section talks about savings, expenses, and budgeting. How are you doing these things and what steps are you taking? This is from Warren Buffett, if you're not familiar with that name, a very wealthy man, and one of his pieces of information is do not save what is left after spending, rather spend what is left after saving. And so the importance of kind of looking at your budget. I know many years ago when my husband decided that, we decided together he was going to be the one to stay home with our children while I worked because it just made more financial sense that way, that we really sat down and we nitpicked our budget apart so that we could really make sure we could afford to do so. And that was 12 years ago. And I want to say every 6 months or so, I sit down and take a really good look at our budget and say, okay, what's working, what's not working? Do I need to cut out any particular thing that's just not necessary? I know I used this example in the assignment video, like a streaming service. Some people have like 15, I'm exaggerating, but like 15 streaming services. Where could you cut some of those out? Or how much money is being spent on fast food every month or on entertainment? Where are those rooms to look at your savings, your spending, your income, outcome, that kind of thing. And just making sure that you're sticking to that budget when you come up with it. So your budget in general consists of 3 areas. Your income, obviously what is coming in, what is going out, your needs, wants, bills, utilities, fun stuff. And then what are you doing to kind of save money, and in what way are you saving that money? So tracking your budget, you want to make sure that you are aware. I get made fun of a little bit by my friends because I have a hard copy checkbook, because for me, that's just, I online bank, but for me, sitting down with my documents, my spreadsheets really helps me see where my money is going and how I can maybe cut back if needed. And so just really balancing your budget, tracking it, making sure that you know all of this information, your debt to income ratio, just being aware, having as much information as possible is what's important. There are some apps that kind of help you do that. I know these two links have since stopped working and I cannot change the slideshow. So these two, Mint and Good Budget, are helpful if you wanted kind of an online website to help you with your budget purposes. Which leads into part of the budget is having like savings and emergency funds. So making sure that you're tucking money aside. Our economy right now is a little scary with the prices of some things. How can we keep an emergency fund? They like financial experts say something along the lines of, we should have 6 months worth of bills saved up. I know that's not always reasonable. I mean, some people cannot save up 6 months worth. That's a difficult ask. But ideally, you should have some kind of fund for emergencies, whether it's like a car repair, your car breaks down, you need $500 to fix your car, whatever that might look like, just having kind of that plan in place so we're not racking up credit cards. So thinking about your emergency fund and what that will look like, having it as a cash reserve, maybe having it as a savings account, but separate from maybe your regular savings, and just knowing what constitutes an emergency. I know this is a silly example, but sometimes I have had people say, oh, well, XYZ was an emergency, and it doesn't always seem that way. So just making sure that you're being very thoughtful with how you were spending that emergency money. So these are more examples on how to create an emergency fund. Where's it going to go? How much you're going to put in every month? What is the goal ultimately? And then even if you can only do $5 here and there, maybe get it started sooner than later. The next section starts talking about the differences between banks and credit unions. This is another question that you'll see on your quiz. So just knowing kind of the difference and how they both have advantages and disadvantages. So I know when we bought one of our cars several years ago, a credit union actually had better rates for us. And so even though we normally bank through like a quote unquote regular bank, the credit union actually was able to do a better job for us on our interest rates. And so we were able to go through them. And so that was one benefit of a credit union. So if you are kind of making those decisions, looking at all the options and advantages and disadvantages of those type of institutions, and also knowing what type of services that wherever it is, your bank or your credit union holds, so you know what you can get when you store your money there. This section then kind of goes into credit card and other debt, just knowing about student loans, because those are a form of debt, credit cards, and knowing about the dangers of debt. So here are some things: the danger of debt, interest, future, and how much debt to take on. So how do you know that you have too much debt? Well, you can't make your payments. If you are living paycheck to paycheck, but because you have too much debt, like you're working on your debt, you're getting contacted by bill collectors, your credit scores are low, you're getting, so obviously some of these are extreme, but that's how you know that maybe debt is getting to the point where you need to address it if you haven't already. Getting a credit card, there are benefits to a credit card, there's dangers as well, but you want to make sure that you're using it appropriately. Something that I want to kind of encourage you to do is I want you to look at your credit score. You do not have to do this to pay for it. I want you to go to Google and type in, or whatever search engine you use, and type in free credit estimator. Sometimes little ads or sponsored ads will come up, but for me it didn't this time. And I want you to go to free FICO score estimator. When you click on that, this is a real quick 10-question survey about your credit. You do not have to put your social, your name, anything in here. You just answer these 10 questions. I'm going to answer them. I'm going to answer them randomly. These are not my honest answers. I want you, hopefully, to honestly answer these because it's going to help you. And some of you may or may not be able to answer some of these questions because of your age. So here is my, again, not my true score, but just based on how I answered, an estimated credit score, because it's important to know what your credit score is. And this is a nice way to kind of get it for free, just like an estimator. When you go to get large purchases, they run your credit score anyway, but this is a good starting point. So making sure you know what your credit score is really important. And also just making sure that you know what type of credit card you're getting. I know if you're a young student, you may not have that credit score yet. So you could start building your credit fairly easily by getting a very low limit credit card and, you know, maybe just using it for gas every month and then pay it off at the end of every month. Or having a utility put in your name and kind of build credit that way. So there are small ways that you can go to build credit. Those of you with student loans, you could start paying on your student loans now, 10, 20, 30 bucks a month. And that way it's going to establish a payment history, and that's going to help your credit as well. So there are ways to help your credit score. There's also a section here that talks about paying for college, the kind of ways to pay for it. A little quote from Ben Franklin. There are things you need to know when you go to, obviously you're here, but when you are kind of making these decisions, you want to know how much your education is going to cost. So going to our homepage under paying for college, tuition and fees, this will start to give you, if you don't click it just right, this will start to give you kind of an idea of how much your education will cost with all the fees. That gives you a roundabout. But then also knowing how much you're going to make. And so this is going to call into play. We've used these sites before, you know, bls.gov. I'll just type in, oh, like physical therapy is there from the last time I did this. So knowing how much money you can make on average. We also have that career coach. If you remember using career coach, you could go in and, okay, we'll come back to it maybe in a little bit. Oh, there we go. You could go into careers. I don't know. I'm just going to click on something kind of random. And, you know, in here, it does have that wages. So again, just knowing what you're going to make is really helpful so that you have an idea of how much income's coming in, and then consider that with your bills. Here's like a little snapshot of that, for example, income versus like your loan. But also, and these were some of the sites I just read, like the BLS, but also knowing that, okay, if I don't want to take out a loan, what are my other options? So I also like to make sure students know about other options. So underneath the same area, paying for college, scholarships. There are a lot of scholarships out there, and some of them are as simple as filling out this little quick scholarship application. You click there, it is really this quick, and submit. Now there are some scholarships, and here I'm going to show you this list here, a scholarship list. It doesn't have to have a certain GPA. If you look, there are going to be like some, like yes, this does say, you know, high school GPA 3.0. There might be some in here that like obviously like honors program, but if you look, there's degree related. There's so many in some of these areas. Look at all these scholarships. And then there's scholarships for different demographics. So if you're a parent, there's scholarships. So it's really helpful to kind of take a look. And then we also have external scholarships, meaning those are not like sponsored by the college, but these are different ones that you could look at, as well as general search tools. And sometimes you might have to do a little bit of writing. But I always like to say, like, if you have to write, I don't know, a 2-page essay or whatever it might be, and it takes you a couple hours, but it gets you $1,000, like, I feel like that's time well spent. So just something to think about, to explore, so you have all your options kind of covered. You know, grants, scholarships, work study, that kind of stuff is ideal before you start heading toward loans. But if you do have to take out a loan, you want to know what the repayment plan is, the interest rate. You know, do you have a balloon rate? Like all those things, subsidized, unsubsidized. You want to know how much you're going to have to eventually pay after. You typically have 6 months after you graduate before you have to start paying on your loans, whether you have a job or not. And you know, you can never declare bankruptcy from student loans. So it's something that's kind of stuck with you for a long time. So you want to make sure that you're also filling out that FAFSA. You do have to fill that every single year. It's not a one and done. You fill it out every year. In fact, you could fill out your FAFSA now for the 25-26 school year and get ahead of it. The last little section starts talking about like protecting your identity, because obviously a lot of this stuff is done online. And so a lot of things I've put into like multi-factor, the authentication, and the pain in the neck passwords, where it has to be like, you know, 20 letters with a character here and what, you know what I'm talking about. But anyway, so like there are some things in place that help you protect your identity, but also just making sure that you're not falling for scams, or you're making sure you're doing your best online to protect. And so there's some kind of like little tips to make sure that you are protecting yourself against that. And then here are just some other general resources as it relates to the topic of this chapter. All right, as I said, I encourage you to take a look at the information here in this section. If there's anything you're like, you know what, I don't have a credit card, I should finally find out a little bit more about that. Or I encourage you to explore the webpage where Paying for College and look at the scholarship options. So please take a look. Let me know if you have any questions. I'll see you next time.